Actions or inactions speak louder than words. That's a lesson Donald Trump seems to be learning the hard way. Now, just 1 month after announcing his 2024 presidential bid, Trump's allies are nowhere to be found. Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, Rick Scott, Josh Hawley, and Lindsey Graham, all once major MAGA players and cheerleaders, are now MIA when it comes to voicing their support for his reelection campaign. In fact, just one GOP senator has publicly endorsed Trump, former football coach Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. You may remember Mr. Tuberville for some comments he made earlier this year about reparations. The Alabama senator claimed Democrats only support reparations for the descendants of enslaved people because, quote, they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Yeah. So not quite the starting lineup Mr. Trump may have hoped for. Instead of a swell of unity for Trump, Republicans seem to be uniting against him. Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson called a Trump-Biden rematch in 2024, quote, the worst scenario for Republicans. Hutchinson has even hinted he may throw his own hat into the ring. Here's what he told Chuck Todd this morning on Meet the Press.
What is your timeline? And what would make you decide not to run for president?
The fact that President Trump has already announced accelerates everyone's time frame. And so the first quarter of next year, you either need to be in or out. And of course, an important factor is not what President Trump is doing necessarily, but what's the level of support out there. And that's important to know.
So let's check on that support. A new Quinnipiac poll found only 31% of voters have a favorable opinion of Trump. That's his lowest favorability rating since July of 2015. That same poll found just 25% of all registered voters and only 56% of Republican voters want Trump as the 2024 nominee. Another poll from USA Today found that by a 2-to-1 margin, Republican voters say they want Trump's policies but prefer a different candidate to carry them. So could the man now dubbed the GOP's biggest loser be setting himself up for another devastating loss? Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jerry Connolly of Virginia. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you, sir. Before we get into Trump's rocky first month, I want to ask you about the breaking news regarding the January 6th committee. Trump is poised to become the first president to be the subject of a criminal referral from Congress. What does that say to you? What do you make of those recommendations? And do you believe the DOJ will follow through?
Well, I think what it says is after exhaustive research, after almost a universally praised process as one of the best select committees ever in the history of the Congress that has conducted itself with enormous propriety and care, a year plus worth of research, 9 public hearings, and a report that will be released shortly. The bottom line is no one is above the law. Do we accept that proposition or not? If we do, the evidence is overwhelming that Donald Trump has to face his reckoning. He is not above the law any more than you or I, and he must be held accountable for crimes, for conspiracy to overthrow the government in a free and fair election, for sedition, for incitement, for obstruction. Those are important questions that have to be addressed. And I believe the enormous weight of evidence compiled by the Select Committee, the January 6th committee, absolutely points in that direction. Now, your second question, what will DOJ do with that? My hope is DOJ will act on it, on the principle that nobody is above the law. Everybody has to follow the law and be accountable when they don't.
So there seems to be a lot of accounting for Trump, both legally and politically, as we see with the 2024 campaign starting the way it has. What's your impression, or what are you hearing among Democrats about the state of this campaign, and what is the assessment of the Republican Party as a whole? Do you think it's sooner or later it's going to coalesce around him, or is this field, at least from a Democratic perspective, one that could possibly be wide open?
You know, most of us were giddy at his campaign and his nomination in 2016, and we live to really regret that giddiness. So I do think that we need to have a word of caution here in underestimating Trump himself as a candidate and the enormous fervor of his base that he generates. Having said that, what struck me in the polling data you just showed was that number, 31%. 31% of voters have a favorable view of him, only 31%. And only 31% in that second poll you showed want him to run again. I think those are devastating numbers for Donald Trump. And I think he is showing his normal chaos. And I think you are seeing some fractures finally in what had been a unified Republican front. You know, this culture of omerta when it comes to Donald Trump. You say, see, hear no evil. He's just fine. Well, he's not. And I think some Republicans are finding there's actually an upside to criticizing him and calling him out when he crosses lines, as he did at Mar-a-Lago with white supremacists, and as he did in calling for the suspension or the elimination of the Constitution itself, a Constitution he swore an oath to uphold.
So in just a few short weeks, Republicans will take control of that wonderful chamber you serve in, the House of Representatives. They've promised a tidal wave of investigations into the Biden administration, Hunter Biden, and anyone who they deem investigatable. You're vying for the top Democratic spot on the House Oversight Committee, which will play a very important role in fending off a lot of those investigations. Talk to us a little bit about what you're thinking, how you're assessing strategically to deal with a hyper-aggressive far-right committee that's going for retributive blood.
Yeah, a committee that Marjorie Taylor Greene has targeted as the committee she wants to get on. So you're quite right. It's going to be trench warfare. You know, this is not an academic classroom exercise where we're debating principles, constitutional principles. This is trench warfare, where we Democrats are going to be defending a Democratic White House and taking the fight to the Republicans. That means you got to be disciplined. And we've been through this before, right? So when President Obama was in the White House and we were in the minority, we had to fight the Republicans time and time again against manufactured scandals and crises. Fast and Furious, IRS scandals, the Benghazi crisis, Hillary Clinton's emails, on and on. And I point out, not a single one of those so-called investigations or scandals produced anything. Contrast that with what you just described in terms of the January 6th hearing and what you described in terms of other legal battlefields for Trump, whether it's his company or his interference with elections or his acolytes who are now subject to possible criminal prosecution. You know, we have real scandals, and they're in the Trump White House and the post-Trump White House, and they need to be looked at, and the Oversight Committee absolutely ought to be looking at it. But of course, that's not the game plan for the Republicans. They want to distract us with somebody's laptop or a stray email so that maybe we'll forget about the actual direct dagger to the heart of democracy Donald Trump represents.
We're looking at a very busy start to the new year, I'm sure. Congressman Gerry Connolly, thank you so much. It's always good to see you.
Thank you, Mike.